Dear friends, I salute you in the next edition of Top Talk with a Turkish-related topic this time. Our guest is Miss Valeria Giannotta, a Turkey expert, originally from Italy. Based in Ankara, Miss Giannotta is the scientific director of Observatory on Turkey at CeSPI, Center of International Political Studies. Miss Giannotta, hello, and I'm welcoming you in Azerbaijan in our program. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be back in Azerbaijan and have a chance to talk with you.
I hope you will have a good time here.
I'm sure.
Today we'll be talking about, we'll discuss how Turkey is seen in the West and how the West is seen in Turkey. Let's try to base our discussion on this very concept. So in the past few years, we've seen a very assertive Turkish foreign policy. It has been conducting a very active policy beyond Turkish borders, active engagement in Syria and Libya, military bases in Qatar and Somalia, vital help to Azerbaijan in Karabakh, and the ambitious Mavi Vatan doctrine in the Mediterranean basin. How are these policies seen and interpreted, firstly, inside of Turkey, and secondly, in the West?
Okay, thank you for this very peculiar and timely question. And I will use the term Türkiye, as in Turkey they are very proud of this, and very recently the name has been changed and accepted by UN.
Yes.
And let me say that in order to understand the Turkey stance in the region, how the foreign agenda has changed, we need to refer at domestic level, because these levels everywhere in the world, but overall in Turkey, they are overlapping. So basically the Turkish approach towards the region recently has changed. Actually, nowadays we enter in a new phase, so there is a pretty much a new approach tending at a more cooperative and normalization stance towards some partners. But a couple of years before, actually since last year, the Turkish approach towards the enlarged Mediterranean, let's put it in this way, was pretty much assertive. And it was a direct reflection of the new synthesis within the domestic environment based on a more nationalistic approach. Starting from 2018, indeed, the leading party, AK Party, and President Erdogan made an alliance with the Nationalist Movement Party, and the rhetoric for the domestic affairs, but also for international affairs, has changed. So the idea of the Büyük ve Güçlü Türkiye has become the main sponsor, so the great and strong Turkey, which was used as a tool in order to compact the electoral support.
Yes.
And it helped a lot in order to grant to Erdogan the majority for starting a new stage in Turkish politics and in launching the presidential system. And also for protecting the Turkish national interest, not just domestically, but in the region as well. So the operation in Syria served to compact the popular support to Erdogan. Indeed, Erdogan won with a large majority the elections. But also the operation in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh, were the glue for compacting the society and in order to show that Turkey and Türkiye has a stake in the region, has some national interest, which is able to protect by itself, and Turkey cannot run the risk to be isolated in the region. When we look at the operation in Libya, for example, that was a sort of retaliation move beside the military support granted to the Libyan forces, the Grand National Accord Unity government.
Yes.
It was signed a memorandum of understanding related to the maritime zone. it was a sort of a reaction to the EastMed project. So this cooperation between some Europeans, Egypt and Arab countries. And Turkey could not run the risk to get isolated and to not get access to some territorial waters. So the defense of national interest in Libya, in Syria against some terrorist organization, because at the end of the day, PYD is recognized by Turkey as the Syrian sister of PKK. Yeah. And the risk of having a territory in the border just controlled by some terrorist organization and to have some spillover effects within the Turkish border, it was a sort of not desirable option for not just the Turkish government but Turkish society as well. And finally, the Nagorno-Karabakh operation was a matter of pride, of pride for the Turkish government and the Turkish people, like the motto "One Nation, Two States." So that's what happened, and this is the feeling at domestic level, which unfortunately contradicts the perception in the West, because when Turkey started to have this more assertive approach and to flex its own muscles, it was perceived as not trustable partner by the West. And a lot of gap and misunderstanding occurred, and the level of mutual frustration increased as well overall from some European countries. We should remember, for example, that beyond the clash in the Eastern Mediterranean, led by Greece and related to Cyprus, in France and Macron, they organized a conference in Ajaccio, and they declared that clearly Turkey is not a trustable country anymore. So starting from that point, some movements were recorded in the Eastern Mediterranean, the more cooperation between Greece and Israel. And finally, we reach a sort of normalization process that nowadays is still under discussion. So there is a gap of trust, let me say. And from the European perspective, there is a feeling that Turkey has been a sort of rogue state, let's put it this way. I mean, strongly embedded within the Western multilateral institutions, such as European Union, even though it's not a full member yet, but it's a candidate member. And many agreements have been signed, and one of the most important is the migration agreement. But Turkey is a member of NATO since 1952. So, and we witnessed that also France and Macron, they clearly stated that NATO is running the risk of brain death or brain drain, something like this, and it was clearly referring to Turkey, because despite the fact that it's embedded in the Western institution, it's trying to pursue an independent policy. So we reached the point that Turkey has been portrayed as shifting the axis. So looking at the East, I mean, trying to find new partners despite the historical connections with the West.
Let's elaborate Turkish-Western relations and mutual narratives a bit later. I would like to focus now on the Mediterranean geopolitics. Although Turkey and Greece have historically had their ups and downs, it's obvious that they are now entering a new phase of tensions, and this time these tensions seem to be very serious. What are the claims of both sides, and do you think these tensions have potential to turn into a military escalation?
Well, we already witnessed a sort of military escalation 2 years ago, in the summer of 2020. Then the two sides were able to create a sort of mechanism for de-escalate the tension that it was functioning quite well until 1 month ago. Yeah. Then the last point was that Greece, sort of, Mitsotakis, the prime minister, tried to convince the US to not sell the F-16 jet to Turkey. Because there is this sort of frozen conflict in history, as you said, between Greece and Turkey, so a huge mistrust, and Greece is perceiving Turkey as a direct threat to their sovereignty. So there is an historical element, but there is also some geopolitical problems, mainly referring to the island of Cyprus, as I said before. So as we know, Cyprus is divided into two sides. The northern part is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is not recognized at international level. And while the Greek side actually is representing the whole island. Along history, this has created several problems, including the Turkish accession as a full member to EU, because many of the chapters are blocked because of the Cyprus issue. But then Greece is a sort of guarantor as well of the right of the Greek Cyprus. And after it was discovered energy, hydrocarbons around the island, the tensions escalated. So what we had witnessed in the recent time, it was also related to the delimitation of territorial water. Because for Turkey it's not acceptable that Greece is still militarizing the islands. And by the way, the Greek island, Castellorizo, is just 2 kilometers away from the territorial coast of Turkey, of Turkey. And by looking at the attempt of creating this exclusive zone, maritime zone, Turkey will be excluded actually from the accession to his own sea. That's why then it was signed a memorandum of understanding with Libya in order to not get isolated. And basically, the militarization of the Greek islands, if we want to be just careful and go into detail, is against the international treaty, which was signed by Italy and Greece in 1947, related to the Dodecanese Islands. Starting from this assumption, actually, Turkey is escalating and sending ships for drilling and sort of proving that has some rights. This cannot be accepted by Greece, and the tensions escalate again. But now I think that the new element, the game changer, is the relations that Greece is trying to establish with the US in a time when US and Turkey are sort of coming back together and trying to find a compromise. You know, we witness many clashes and many crises between Washington and Ankara. Finally, the F-35 program got frozen, and Turkey, as the first NATO country, got under sanction because of this, as a retaliation movement actually for having purchasing the S-400 defense system from Russia. So there was and there is still mistrust in the West between Ankara and Washington, but in this time, when the Ukrainian and Russian crisis occurred, the dialogue seemed to be relaunched, and we recorded some positive signs as well. So Greece interfering in this way towards the US, was a sort of bad move, according to Erdogan, that, by the way, since we are in an electoral campaign, is using this and is using this narrative against Greece also as a pretext in order to, as I said before, to get some popular support back. Because anytime you speak about Turkey national interest and the importance of Turkey flags or Turkey rights in the region, then Turkish people feel proud and they feel very, very represented.
Ms. Giannotta, another geopolitical development is happening in the north, in the Baltic Basin. In a historical move, Sweden and Finland have decided to abandon their historical neutrality and join NATO. Ironically enough, this issue is also related to Turkey, because Ankara has recently claimed that it might delay Swedish and Finnish membership bid of NATO unless the former receives satisfactory assurances that these two Nordic countries would no longer support the PKK, the Kurdish terrorist organization, which has been accepted as a terrorist organization by several countries and international institutions. Do you think the Turkey's concerns will be addressed somehow, and the parties will find some way out of this deadlock?
I think it's a very difficult option actually to reach. I mean, as long as the requirements of Turkey will not be satisfied, Turkey will impose the veto for the accession. There are clear evidences overall in Sweden, and I speak about Sweden because very recently, last week, the Swedish government was running the risk to get delegitimated, and thanks to one vote that it was by a Kurdish exponent with a clear connection with PKK, the trust was given to the government. And this is a sign of how much the violent action of some Kurdish groups, let's say, and the PKK is represented within the domestic environment in Sweden. So as long as those countries, which have clearly connections with PKK, and PYD in Syria, as I said before, which is the sister organization of PKK, do not cut the connection and do not grant support to those organizations, which are terrorist organizations recognized as such by Turkey, but also by European Union. I mean, very recently it was published a new terrorist list, and PKK and the sister organizations are included, and by US as well. I mean, Turkey will not accept anything like this because it will be unthinkable that being a member of the same international organization based on security and defense, and some members would harm terrorist groups against another country. There are evidence, moreover, that after the last Turkish operation in Syria in 2018, Sweden and Finland have granted support to PYD, but not only, they have put sanctions on Turkey because of the operations. So this has created, again, a sort of mistrust. On the other side, we should consider the strategic element. Turkey nowadays is the only country who is having an open dialogue with Russia, thanks to the personal contact of President Erdogan and Vladimir Putin. They have a sort of cordial relations. They are not agreeing on several dossiers, but they a long history, and more recently they've been able to overcome the disagreement in order to reach compromise. I mean, they had a pretty much realpolitik based approach in several dossiers in Syria and Libya and moreover. And so, in order to channel also the request of some European countries and to find a sort of compromise, to find a solution for the current crisis in Ukraine. And also because Turkey is planning an operation in Syria, and we know that in Syria the Russian presence is pretty much important. And all the previous operations were carried out by Ankara thanks to a sort of implicit support granted by Moscow. So in this very fragile balance, Ankara cannot run the risk to make Russia disappointed because of its national interest and because of the role that it's aiming at playing as a mediator, let's put it this way. Yes. We shouldn't neglect that Turkey was the only country able to bring the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia and Ukraine at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. In Istanbul, they hosted the mediation discussion. Already there are several calls that occurred between Erdogan and Putin and Zelensky. So diplomacy is still going on in a formal way, but also behind the stage. And also the Europeans are just recognizing, acknowledging the role of Turkey in this, because Turkey at the end of the day is doing what Europeans and the West wasn't able to do. I mean, keeping the channel open, and we know that in any mediation and negotiation process, you should talk with both parties, right?
I actually wanted to ask my next question on the Ukraine war and Turkish stance in this conflict, but you've already covered this matter. No matter how much it might irritate some outside powers, Turkey again has kind of become a central element in another conflict, a central actor, let's put it this way. As you just said, it's supporting the Ukrainian resistance on the one hand. On the other hand, Ankara has kept a channel of communication with Moscow open. Is there a domestic support towards this very position? What is the discourse at expert and societal level in Turkey regarding Turkish position in the Ukrainian conflict?
There is a sort of broad support, and there is a concern as well overall from the expertise side, because we know that Turkey is pretty much related to the Western infrastructure, let's put it this way. So it's a candidate member of European Union, and it's within NATO and within some other multilateral agreement. On the other side, it enjoys a sort of cordial but also compartmentalized relations with Russia, and there is this hot potato of S-400 defense system in the end. So the main question from the academic world and scientific world is what will happen after the war will be over. I mean, we are in that position that Turkey has to take a stance, but this stance can be at detriment of some relations. On the other side, Europe and the West needs to clarify their stance towards Turkey, because anyway, as a candidate member, it's true, and it's very sad to admit that Turkey has suffered from double standard by European Union and the West. And also NATO has to acknowledge Turkey's role and Turkey's interest. So I think it will be a turning point at the end. And it will be critical decision also for Turkey and an Erdogan party government if he's still in power. I mean, it's true that it's very pragmatic. So there is no strategy behind. But what will happen next? This is a big question mark. I mean, once the ashes of the war will be on the ground, when we need to relaunch. I mean, definitely Europe will not be the same, and there will be something new. And what will be Turkey's roles in this?
Interesting.
But still, I mean, normal people in daily life, they're pretty much glad about the Turkish behavior in this time, because as I said, it's the only country who is able to speak with both parties, and we know what is the Western approach in this case.
Yes, Ms. Giannotta, let's quickly touch upon the relations between Turkey, where you are currently residing, and Italy, your native country. We know that in Libya, both Italy and Turkey side with the international recognized government of national accord. To what extent are Italian and Turkish interests aligned, and not only in Libya, but in other regions or in other spheres?
Well, let me start in this way. The relations between Turkey and Italy are considered more than a special friendship. So they are very strong, and they have a very important historical background, I mean, over centuries. And also belonging to the same Mediterranean basin helped a lot in establishing communication, diplomatic connections, and also people connection. I mean, we feel pretty much similar to Turkish people and vice versa. And also within the European frame, Italy has been one of the few countries able to mediate between the European bloc, when it was the case to put sanctions or just to overcome some crisis between European Union and Turkey, and the Turkey stance. So Italy puts a lot of efforts in channeling Turkey demands, also related to the Libyan crisis, the Irene operations, or when Macron, for example, France was pretty much against Turkish role in Libya, despite the fact that France anyway was siding with Haftar and not with the National Accord Unity government. Coming to Libya, the interests are pretty much the same and they overlap. I mean, they belong, both countries, as I said before, they're Mediterranean countries, and in this big Mediterranean basin, there are many challenges and common opportunities coming from energy. So both countries have a huge stake in Libya related to energy. Yes. And Turkey, as Italy, are highly dependent countries. So they do not have any sources. Mm-hmm. So they mainly depend on some other countries. And we are seeing, for example, nowadays that we have the energy problem because of the Russian sanctions on gas and oil. Italy is running after several new supply, right? And so they are pretty much dependent on energy. They are pretty much they are facing the same challenge of migrations, for example. And Libya was one of the main hotspots. Italy was one of the first arriving hotspots for the migration routes, as Turkey. For the traffic of human rights, human organs, for example, or for the terrorist corridors. Yes. So they share several challenges. But also, when we look at the energy level, and this is something that I still do not clearly understand, and it comes me back to the Cyprus issue. So basically, it's true that for Italy, the solidarity principle with European Union is pretty much important and sometimes prevails on the bilateral level relations that it has with certain countries. But if we look at the situation in Cyprus, Italy may have the same interests as Turkey. For example, Eni was one of the main companies operating there. So finding a compromise with Turkey will be beneficial, I think, for the national interest of both.
I see. As I usually say, foreign policy is the continuation of domestic policy. So in this interview, I cannot ignore the fact that next year Turkey will have presidential elections. Some experts, especially abroad, they are predicting some changes in Turkish foreign policy after these presidential elections. Do you think there will be some real tectonic changes in Turkish foreign assertive policies we have been speaking about for the past half an hour now, or Turkish assertive and active engagement, let's put it this way, in the near abroad has reached that level which no any government will be able to reverse? What is your take on that?
I think that there are some red flags, and no matter which party is in the government, but as long as the national interest of Turkey is under threat, then the response will be exactly the same. And this explains why Erdogan parted when it was in crisis of support by using the foreign policy agenda, was able to get the support back.
Rally around the flag.
Exactly. So there are some issues that are really transversal between within the society. When you speak about Cyprus, this is a national interest issue. When you speak about the fight against terrorists, PKK or PYD, this is a national interest. When you speak also about the feeling of brotherhood with Azerbaijan, for example, and Nagorno-Karabakh,
it's not going to change.
It's not going to change because it's a matter of background. I mean, it's something that runs in the veins of Turkish people, and it's very attached to the Turkish psychology as a country, not as a government. So maybe the level of response can change, but those elements belong to the tradition of Turkish policy. I mean, if you read history, the approach towards Cyprus and towards these specific topics did not change. But paradoxically, sometimes it changed the level of response. When there was the more secular government, the operation in Cyprus was carried out with military means.
Yes.
So this is another level of how the West is misreading Turkey, because sometimes they label Erdogan or Erdogan party as a murdering government, but they neglect the fact that with a more secular government, let's put a more secular based on Kemalist principle government, the response will be harsher, because the role of military was different in that time. So there are certain topics that I believe will not change. What will happen next week is still a question mark. Next year, is still a question mark. But what is sure that there are two main issues where these new elections will take place. I mean, two main cleavages and fractures within Turkish society that will be dominant for changing the vote. One is the migration, and the second is the economy. They may be read from different perspectives, but at the end of the day, they overlap. So in Turkey nowadays, there are more than 4 million Syrians and something like 300,000 several other refugees. And according to the new economic development, so high inflation rate and the evaluation of the Turkish lira, the level of unemployment, as well as according to the nationalistic feeling of the Turkish people, in general, society is not happy with the presence of refugees. And this was one of the diamond policy of the AK Party, and it was sold very well to the West as well. Also, it was the glue for the connections between Turkey and European Union, but it's not sustainable anymore. So I think how we will address this issue, the government or the opposition will be one of the defining point of the next election according to economy, because people are pretty much discontent.
Giannotta, at the end of our interview, I would like to go back to my original question. Turkey is not the same country which we witnessed in the 90s. It's not just a NATO member state, or it's not just a EU candidate state. It is somehow trying to establish itself as a regional power. It's trying to create its own regional pole. So you have already explained the domestic support towards Turkish foreign policy, that there are some red lines, that many fundamental issues will not probably change. But how do you think the collective West, given that we all understand that the notion of West is not monolithic, but still, let's refer to Western countries as a collective West. How do you think, will the West finally accept Turkey's ambitions in this part of the world, or this divide between some of the Western powers and Turkey will continue to deepen in the coming years?
This is a very nice question. The point that Turkey is aiming at being a global and a regional player, and being a pole of attraction, as you said, but also because the West, I mean, the dominant international powers are absent, the great absent in the areas where Turkey is acting. Look at Libya, for example. The West, as you said, it was totally fractured. I mean, France and Italy standing, some other countries, I mean, and supporting different governments. So it's filling the gap. And I think this could be a very difficult to digest. In a West which is showing lack of relaunching itself, it's clear that the West and the liberal system anyway, it's in crisis. And also the Ukrainian and Russia conflict is showing and proving that. So there is a sort of deadlock nowadays in the Western countries. As I said before, it will come the time that we need to relaunch and we need to start a deep reflection on what will be the role of Turkey and some other emerging countries. Starting from considering that within the main international institutions, Western institutions, some countries are not also represented. If you look at the Security Council, for example, I mean, the composition of the permanent five is reflecting an old international system, while the distribution of power nowadays is changing. So we need to acknowledge that Turkey is a new pole of attraction. And it will be painful, I believe, but it will be also interesting. And we need to be humble and realistic in recognizing and in acknowledging this. I do believe that overall with this government in Turkey, the clash with the West will go on. Because in one side, from the Turkish side, is a tool. No, just blaming the West, some European countries is a tool, again, for popular support, because it fits the psychology of Turkish people anyway. On the other side, this government is not seen with favor by some European countries, which are lamenting the fact that there is a gap at level of rule of law, at a democratic level of the country, so there is a huge gap of trust to fill. And by the way, we should consider as well that Turkey has been waiting at the door of Europe for the last 60 years.
Yes.
And I will conclude with this. It may sound as a provocation, actually, but it's true. Like nowadays, despite the fact that Turkey has started the dialogue with Europe back to the 60s along the Ankara Agreement, it was accepted as a candidate member to European Union in 1999. Negotiation has started in 2005. Nowadays, just one chapter out of 35 has been opened and closed, and the main chapters are frozen because of Cyprus. Nowadays, Turkey is enjoying the same status as Ukraine, which is just sent the application to the European Union, which means something, I believe, right? So there is something to adjust anyway.
Thank you, Ms. Giannotta, for this informative conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you to you for your time and invitation once again.